government protects. Market supply, government protects, communities engage. Um, Governments in America don't protect nearly the way they do in Scandinavia.
Why knowledge matters. Welcome, I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Professor Henry Mintzberger. Professor Henry Mintzberger is the Cleghorn Professor of Management at McGill University, and then now he is here. I'm so thrilled to have you, Professor Henry Mintzberger. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's such a thrill because you're really one of the giants in your field of studies, and it has a particular honor to me to have you. Now, first and foremost, just to give us some context, who is Henry Mintzberger in only one sentence?
No, I I wouldn't even begin to answer that question if you gave me 100 sentences. I'm just me. We'll find out. Listen on, and we'll get the answer.
I love that. I love that. That's so a nice and genuine answer. Now, before we really dive into your beautiful book called Rebalancing Society, let's give us some context of what you're doing at McGill University. Yes, exactly. That's a beautiful book.
Well, I'm a professor of management who's straight into political science, I guess, without training in political science. And I've written all kinds of books, mostly about management, some with regard to healthcare management, not particularly business management, just management in general, organizations. My latest book is called Understanding Organizations, finally. Um, so that's what I do.
Yeah, it's beautiful because you really wrote more than a dozen books. Incredible, so an incredible career. But let's start and now dive into the book, Rebalancing Society. So, what made you write the book in the first place?
Well, the short answer is that the world's going to hell, and it was going to hell even when I started to work on this, and I could see this coming. The slightly longer answer is that I visited Prague in 1991, 2 years after the Velvet Revolution, and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and people were running around saying that capitalism had triumphed, and I thought that's absolutely dead wrong. Communism collapsed under its own dead weight. It was completely out of balance, and the Western countries, the Western democracies, were rather in balance across three sectors, not two. You can't you can't sit a stool on one leg, and you can't sit a stool on two legs. You need a third leg, and those legs to me are the public and private sector, as we always discuss, but the plural sector or the community sector. And and communism completely disparaged community, tried to control the public sector, the private sector completely, and collapsed because of that. But because of that misunderstanding, capitalism has been triumphing ever since, and disparaging community and dominating government.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you really make a case that you actually have to have three pillars in order for a market to actually
Right.
function properly. So let's dive first into these three pillars that are crucial that you already mentioned to some extent.
Yeah. So we all know about the public sector and government. We all know about the private sector and business. The plural sector is made up of all those associations, and that's a word that de Tocqueville used when he wrote about democracy in America in the 1830s, 1820s, and 1830s. Um, community associations that are distinguished by the fact that they're not owned by the government or by the state, and they're not owned by private investors. So they're either owned by members, which are like co-ops or unions, or they're owned by nobody. And it's amazing how many organizations in the world are owned by nobody, like Greenpeace, like McGill University, like the Cleveland Clinic or the Mayo Clinic. Um, yeah, all our social movements and social efforts and charities and huge sector, but not well understood because we're so enamored with public and private, we forget plural. I call it plural because the variety of associations in this sector is huge. Also, because we need a word that goes with public and private so they can be seen together, public, private, plural.
Yeah, that really makes sense. And that's why also the book, right, Rebalancing Society, and also what you elaborate so nicely in the book is that you really draw on these historical examples, right? With communism, you also don't want to go back into communism because it actually, what happened there, and we still see it in now, for example, in the former Soviet Union, in Russia, for example, that innovation and a market-driven economy still is not really existent to the extent that we see, for example, in North America, which you have the most incredible companies, for example, X or Apple, and all this innovation. And would you argue that this was created and ultimately came into fruition because of the system that was built that forged this i- this this invention, this spirit of creating something out of nothing?
Yeah, there's an interesting sideline to this. Apple's amazing, at least as long as Steve Jobs was there. Now it's running into some troubles, especially right now. Um, um, but there was an entrepreneur in Scandinavia a woman who moved to the United States and concluded that it's harder to be an entrepreneur in America than it is to be in Scandinavia, because in Scandinavia, if you fail, you know your kids will go to school, you know you'll have enough to eat, you know that you'll have health care. Whereas in America, if you fail, you could be threatening your whole family. So she concluded that entrepreneurship has become easier in Scandinavia, which is a balanced, which are all the Scandinavian countries are really quite balanced. The community is strong, government is strong, business is strong. So yes, Apple has done well and certainly business benefits from the imbalance in America. But you're getting movements towards Trump, and you're getting movements toward populism in all the liberal democracies because a lot of people have been screwed by the system. There's government protects, market supply, government protects, communities engage. Um, Governments in America don't protect nearly the way they do in Scandinavia.
And that's so important that you mentioned that. And now another question: do you think, because usually from
Your voice is fading completely.
is it better now?
Yeah.
Is you Do you think that the markets, because that's also one of the points that you are making in the book, I find very enlightening, can actually misbehave?
Of course, markets are always misbehaving. Look at the performance of corporate hospitals in the United States, or physicians writing bitter op-ed pieces about corporations taking over their practices. Yeah, markets can fail all over the place. That's not to say markets are bad. Markets are wonderful where competition is key and where the buyers can be aware. I can be aware of a restaurant that doesn't suit me. Well, I don't go back. I can't be aware of a physician who's cheating me because I don't know what the heck he's doing or whether I need that test or I don't. Even though some private insurance company is driving the physician to do that test. So where the markets can beware, yes, markets are great. Where markets are difficult for us to understand, they can be terrible.
Yeah, that's so important and so enlightening. And you also mentioned, and that is actually real, I think, in many ways, that we are going from a market economy to a corporate society. Elaborate on that.
Well, it's essentially what I just said, that a market economy is uh, it serves us. It serves us for our needs. But when government starts intervening in when business starts intervening in government, business is great in its place, which is the competitive marketplace. It's horrible when it gets into the political space. And the Supreme Court of the United States basically opened the door to unlimited private funding of public elections, which means that the Supreme Court basically legalized bribery in the United States, and the country is going to hell.
You also mentioned 32% versus 9% of paid taxes in the US. So in the past, corporate America paid up to 32% taxes, and today it's about 9%. Where does this come from? Where does this belief and distrust into corporation come from?
Well, as I said, if government if all the members of Congress, including Democrats, not just Republicans, are bought off by the need to raise huge sums of money, then they're beholden to people and they give them tax cuts. So Trump was elected by people who are angry with big business, and what does he do? He turns around and gives them tax cuts too. So so the world, in a sense, through some association, decided that corporations should pay a minimum of 15%. No country should allow corporation tax rates to go below 15%. That wasn't a minimum, that's a maximum. That's the target to which they all shoot now. So they go down to 15%, or maybe some go slightly up, but but you know we all complain about healthcare. Healthcare is not failing, healthcare is succeeding. The problem with healthcare is not failure, the problem with healthcare is success. That the physicians and pharmaceutical companies and so on are brilliant at coming up with amazing ways to save our lives, but they're expensive. In the case of physician ideas, they're expensive because they're naturally expensive, like open heart surgery. In the case of pharmaceuticals, they're expensive partly because we let them get away with outrageous pricing for monopoly, and granting them monopoly. So, so, so the costs go up, but we don't want to pay taxes. That's the problem in healthcare. The problem in healthcare is that we don't want to pay taxes, and corporations aren't paying taxes. So the costs are going up, and the revenues are going down. That's the problem in healthcare. It's not failing. It's our failure to pay for them that's failing.
Yeah, that really, really makes sense. What I also enjoyed so much in this book is really that it's about serving society, and competitive markets actually should serve. Ex- Elaborate further on this, how as a corporation you should ultimately serve society, and this would ultimately also lead to the benefits of the business itself.
Well, business couldn't make 5 cents if there wasn't government to protect it, in the sense of regulations, in the sense of competition, in the sense of rules, just rules of contract. We don't live a brutal dog eat dog society. We live in a different society because government enables that to happen, and then business is served by that. This idea that business has no, responsibility to anybody but its shareholders is absurd. It's ridiculous. A day trader who buys in the morning and sells in the afternoon owns the company. An employee who works there for 30 years has no stake in the ownership of the company. That doesn't make sense. So people rebel and they elect or try to elect Le Pen and Trump and all these other thugs who are supposedly going to serve them but aren't serving them at all.
And one of the challenges is also, and you beautifully mentioned this in the book, that we really should be clearer on what we want and not on what we do not want. And that's also oftentimes the problem when it comes to making or enacting changes at the large scale, right? That oftentimes we know what doesn't work and we focus so much that we actually are not ultimately focused on solutions.
Well, the COP conferences, I call them the cop out conferences, because the governments go straight home and make long term plans. Uh, so, who's making these long term plans? 4 year governments. In the democratic societies, 4 year governments are making 20, 30, 40 year plans. Well, thank you very much. Those plans are useless. They're worth nothing because in 4 years, somebody else will come along, as happened in the US with Obama, uh, as happened in every other country where the government changes from left to right. Those plans are useless. So we get incredible problems with climate change, and we're doing on the positive end. What we are doing is creating alternate forms of energy. That's fine, but we're not getting rid of dirty forms of energy, not nearly fast enough because of all this lobbying power and governments being afraid of coal companies and oil companies.
It's certainly also, it's a really tough task, obviously, to transition at the pace that we actually should do. And as you just mentioned, usually it's 4 years, and after that it's very likely that there's a change in government, and then everything just starts again. But on the other hand, it might also be very problematic if a very bad government stays longer than 4 years. So it is a trade-off, but
Yeah, yeah. Of course, there are all kinds of governments that stay 40 years. I mean, you've got all kinds of dictators who just hang in there forever. But that's a separate issue. Look, in all these cases, this monopoly of power has to be challenged on the ground. Uh, that's what started to happen in Iran now. Um, so it happened in many other countries. Unfortunately, we rebel against one form of imbalance by going to another form of imbalance. So the Czechs got rid of communism in 1989, and the Americans arrived. Jeffrey Sachs et al. Arrived and said capitalism is your solution. So they went from one form of imbalance to another.
now a little bit more personal questions. What does it give you, the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I feel, despite intense frustration in getting this message through, and I'm delighted that you're helping to change that. But it's very hard to get through. One day I'm going to publish a book called "If You Don't Hear from Us in 10 Days," which are all the New York Times comments that I submitted that never got published. So it's frustrating,
Yeah.
but it's satisfying that at least I'm trying and continue to do it and I won't give up.
How has
So I
it
thank you. So I thank you for helping to change that.
there is also so much disruption, obviously, with technology, right? So do you see this disruption that is happening right now in favor of rebalancing society, or not so much?
One major impact of new technologies has been the diminution, what's the word, the reduction in the influence of community. And as I said, community is one of the three pillars that you have to support society on. And yet, if you think about all the new technologies as they came along, the car came along, so we no longer walked on the street. The telephone came along, so we no longer knocked on doors. Um, uh, Television came along, so we didn't go out for entertainment. And now the social media are isolating us even more. So, we're on Zoom instead of going into the office for meetings. We can work at home. But, nobody ever bumped into somebody at the coffee machine after a Zoom call or this call, which means that we lose that community and that connection that we have.
Does it worry you?
Yes, I mean, who knows what the ultimate consequence will be? Something is dumbing us down, and I suspect a lot of these factors of social media are dumbing us down in a way, and it's dangerous.
Yeah, it is. It is really, and I'm so fortunate that you're talking, that you're so alive, and that you are so involved in your work. And also, I can really hear and feel the passion you have for the work, and really to make this world a better place, especially when it comes to a system, an economic, social, and political system with this. Crucial aspect of having a plural sector that to some extent even mediates between the private and also the
Mm.
public
Yeah,
sector.
that's true, and hold both of them to account. Yeah.
When did you come to this insight, and how has your thinking changed over the past 20 years?
Well, it's more like 1980, 1991, so that's more like 30 years or more, 35 years. Um, as I said, it just occurred to me being in Prague, where the site of the Velvet Revolution and the fall of communism, that capitalism hadn't triumphed. Balance triumphed, and capitalism has been triumphing ever since. And I saw that coming. My ideas have developed. I wouldn't say they've changed. I would say they've developed. So, for example, at this point, I see Reformation very much like in the case of Luther. I see Reformation as the only way out, or as the most likely way out, which is ground up, bottom up mass movement.
And that's what you really also write in the book, a radical renewal. That's what you mean by
Yeah,
radical renewal.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly, exactly. Good.
What if we do not take this radical renewal? Because, one thing, if you study a little bit history, we always see, and you mentioned it, right? We always go from one extreme to the other extreme. You see it in all the revolution that happened throughout the world, right? Even recent ones, the French Revolution, it always ultimately goes to the absolute extreme. We then ultimately terrorism is ultimately justified, right? What happened
Yeah.
in the French Revolution. So how do we avoid that? Because we all know there is a lot at stake. And if we look at how society right now is, it's really hard, right? But on the other hand, it's like, well, it's maybe just the lesser evil, but that's also not the solution, obviously.
Well, look, I'm riding one horse, which is the idea of three sectors and balance and bottom up reformation. Other people may come up with other things, and the more the better. But we have to come up with other ways of seeing things. we have a system of three superpowers. I was just doing a piece called "Superpower Corrupts," and antagonistic superpowers corrupt absolutely. We need to get rid of the idea of superpowers. Well, so I sit here and say, yeah, we need to get rid of superpowers. They're not going away. But until they go away, with three people on the nuclear button, it's crazy. It's crazy. I just don't know when people will wake up.
It is so true. I just have one one questions in terms of when it comes to investing money, especially for in when big corporation have to make also profit, obviously, and usually the argument comes up and says, well, if we can't really make really make profit, then no one really will invest at times billions of dollars into a new, let's say, way of in medicine, for example.
Yeah. That's okay. I mean, we don't. We're not restricted to for-profit business. Um, Jonas Salk was funded by the March of Dimes. Um, he refused to patent the Salk vaccine, and therefore it spread immediately everywhere. Uh, so we're not beholden to investors who want to make obscene profits necessarily. I mean, I don't deny them. If they come up with a better mousetrap, and I have a choice of mousetraps, I don't mind if they make obscene profits. But when a pharmaceutical company comes up with something that could save lives and price it not so they can make a fair profit, but so they can make an obscene profit, I think that's manslaughter. I think that's manslaughter. If people are dying because they can't afford their medicines, which could be affordable and at the same time reasonably profitable, then they should be charged with manslaughter. Any society that tolerates this price what the market will bear is abhorrent, you know? So,
Yeah, I'm delighted that you're also so open when it comes to these issues. I think it's very important because it is literally, people are dying, millions of people are dying because the same happens to some extent also when it came to COVID. Now, you also say, why not? Why not is very important because it helps us to imagine a better solution. Elaborate on that and what you're actually saying in your beautifully written book.
well, there are some people who say why because they can't see past what this the status quo, and there are other people who say why not because we have to try things, and we might make mistakes, but if we don't try things, we won't make mistakes. Right now, everything's headed in a terrible direction: climate, income disparities, nuclear things, wars. We better get smart.
Have you always had, to some extent, like a positive outlook in the sense of that you had this why not? Where does it come from that you have this imagination that we have to think about why not and not just the why? Is there something in your childhood that indicated, hey, Henry Mintzberger, he will one day become a beacon of hope and a beacon of what he is doing, in concrete terms, in publishing books and make people think?
Well, I had a pretty ordinary childhood, very comfortable childhood. So maybe, on one hand, it should have driven me to be very conventional. On the other hand, I didn't feel risk or, people say I'm very courageous to sit in my basement and shoot out these missives. Well, I don't think that's courageous. Uh, I'm an academic. I'm kind of protected in my job. Uh, and so I say what I think. And if I lived in under communism, I couldn't do that. But I live in Canada, and I'm encouraged to do it. So no problem. But my childhood could have sent me in a conventional direction. I was the youngest of two children, so maybe that sent me in another direction. Youngest kids tend to be different. So maybe it was that. Who knows?
And also, you also obviously touch on the solutions and give us some taste of how we should start with, because oftentimes that's actually the hardest thing to do. And you mentioned the mirror. What is it about the mirror?
Yeah, I write some short stories, and I want to, but they're not fiction. They're fact, and they're experiences, and I want to package them and call them reflections from the mirror. I think that's what you're referring to, maybe. And uh, this idea that we look at reality and we reflect on it and we explain it differently. That's what I've done all my career. I started off by studying what managers do, and everybody said managers plan, organize, coordinate, and control. And I watched what they did, and I said, I don't see any of that going on. I see them being interrupted. I see them, jumping from one thing to another. I see them very action oriented. I see them not wanting to read, more wanting to talk. So I just described all that, and they said, "Wow, he's so smart." Well, what's so smart? He's like the little kid in the Hans Christian Andersen story. I just stood there and said, "Hey, the emperor's not wearing clothes." Now, I don't mean that to mean that the managers were not sort of proper. I don't mean that part of the story. Um, but I do mean the part of the story that I just wrote down what I saw.
Coffee or tea?
Neither. Neither. I don't like the taste of coffee, and I'm not a big fan of tea. I'll drink it sometimes. Um, I like I like soup, ironically, but I don't like tea. I like hot soup, but I don't like tea. And the more it's in the soup, the better. I like mixed soup. So, yeah, coffee, tea, or cold water. Cold water.
Walk us through how an ordinary day, looks like in Professor Henry Mintzberger's day.
Well, like today, I wrote in the morning. I'm working on a short version of Rebalancing Society, a kind of pamphlet version. So I wrote most of the day. Then I did a bit of mail, email, and that kind of thing. And then I had a Zoom call, which I have not every day, but many days. I had two Zoom calls, one about a program we have that we had to discuss some issues with it. And the second is what I do now, what I'm doing now, which I do frequently. I probably during COVID, I probably did 150 Zoom calls, many times in universities or conferences or whatever. Not speeches, all Q&A.
Does it help, all this new technology that is now introduced and just improved since COVID, in terms of your day-to-day business and how you teach and do research?
Well, I'd rather teach in person in my own classes, but I do want to reach a lot of people. And where are you now? In which city?
In Nimisku, it's in northern Quebec.
Oh, you're here in Quebec, in northern Quebec.
Yeah,
Which town?
in Nemska, the Cree Nation of Nemska.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, interesting. Still, for me to get there, it'd probably be harder for me to get there than to get to London.
Yeah, it's only 14 hours. It's true. It's only 14 hours car drive. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is the Cree area.
exactly. James Bakery. Yeah.
Okay, so I can get to London faster. So this way, I have 5 minutes, and by Q&A, I don't have a lot of preparation, and I just walk into the room, turn on my laptop, and here we are.
What can our listeners concretely do in order to contribute to rebalancing society?
What can who do?
What can our listeners, myself, do in order to contribute to rebalancing society?
Well, I call this the Irene question because everybody says, "Okay, that's good. Now what can I do?" So I kept trying to answer the question. Everybody said, yeah, but what can I do? So if you go on rebalancingsociety.org, and maybe you can show it on the screen at some point, and you go to the page called acting, and you look at the table there, um, there's a matrix of acting alone in community and business and government globally, and acting to reframe, to fix, and to renew. And there are about 35 dots, and you can hit any dot and get all kinds of ideas about what I can do. You can start by recycling if you're not recycling, but you can do all kinds of things. You can vote differently. You can march. You can, although marching, uh, don't occupy Wall Street, because Wall Street has never done anything wrong. It's a street. It's the people behind the closed doors of Wall Street that are the problem. So if you're going to march, march for tangible things that are wrong.
What makes you happy?
Hiking. Hiking. I love sort of canoeing and hiking and snowshoeing and skating, but what makes me happy is getting the word out. So I thank you again. Um, that kind of thing, and children and grandchildren.
What makes you truly, and obviously it seems like almost the same question, but there might be a different, you might be answering it differently. What makes you truly feel alive, connected to the world and to the universe? What gives you joy?
All that, just what I said, especially getting out into nature, and physically, like walking. The other day, uh, I had to go all over the city. I didn't have the car. I ended up walking for almost 2 hours, going from one place to another. I felt so good when I came home.
And
And writing something that nails it. When I'm working on the pamphlet, I get a new kind of expression to say something. I feel really good about that. I kind of need that almost every day. I need like a kind of, something to help me that way.
it almost seems like it's like meditation for yourself, just to
Yeah,
put your thoughts down, and it just calms you down, I get, because
yeah.
you're just such a brilliant writer as well. It was such
Okay.
a thrill to read your book, and you have written, dozens of books, so I'm really, really grateful. The last question: do you at times celebrate modesty?
Modesty
Yeah.
all the time, all the time. I hate to be, as a kid, if my father took me to get a suit and they measured me, I couldn't stand it. And today, if I meet someone and they're looking at me like, oh my God, I'm in front of this guy, I just want to run away. Uh, because I'm happy to have a conversation with, like we're having, with people who are wanting to discuss things, but I don't want to be oogled. I don't want to be, you know, uh, sort of made a fuss over.
What is the one regret that you never ever want to have at the end of your life?
Maybe rebalancing society not succeeding. Who knows?
That's beautiful. And I really can feel that you're truly concerned and you really want the best for people. It's not just that you are a brilliant academic, in the ivory tower, but you're truly also a man of the world, of ordinary people.
Hope so.
What helped you to stay really in touch with the world and to remain so also humble? the way you are. You're so simple the way you express yourself. You don't have. It seems like you're just, and that's really impressive. And I think that's precisely the people that the general public too really respond best if someone is truly honest and wants the best and not want to somehow talk down to people.
Well, I have 42,000 followers, and Trump has, what, 150 million followers? So that's not always true. So I'm happy for the people who are interested and want to get into these conversations. But Trump would be the least modest human being on earth, I would guess.
What is one thing that you say this is the best advice that you can give for a young person, for example, in life, in order to really develop? Because it really seems that you truly also developed incredibly also in your spirit, in terms of who you are now genuinely, which is, in my view, even more important than your achievements. Is actually the achievement as the person you truly become, in terms of that you might lose. Some people say, well, one of achievement might be that you lose the fear of death and so on, and that is an indicator basically of spiritual growth.
Yeah, be true to yourself. Be true to yourself and look, see what's there. Don't accept the status quo. Don't accept what everybody believes. Look and see if it's true to yourself, like the little boy in the Hans Christian Andersen story.
Beautiful. Professor Henry Mintzberger, thank you so much for being on the show, and to be truly a gift for myself and really for the world.
Thank you, Yannick. Nice to chat.
Henry Mintzberger. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.the-ykm.com.